In the summer of 979 AD, the oppressive heat of the North China Plain could make even the toughest armor sweat the smell of rust. The city of Youzhou, Beijing, the heart and strongest fortress of the 16 prefectures of Yan and Yun, was besieged by over 100,000 Song Dynasty troops. For half a month, the relentless cycle of attack and defense had studded the city walls with a dense forest of arrows and stained them with dark red blood. The very air seemed thick with the stench of slaughter. At this moment, in a temple south of the city, the supreme ruler of the Great Song, Emperor Taizong of Song, was too anxious to sleep. Outside his window lay the isolated Khitan city, besieged and teetering on the brink of collapse. It was almost within his grasp, yet it clung to life by a thread. Just a few days earlier, 300 elite, first-to-ascend soldiers had finally breached the walls, only to be cut off from reinforcements and annihilated by a swarm of Khitan defenders. Zhao Guangyi could feel a crisis of morale looming. This Song army had been on the campaign trail for 3 months. They had already destroyed the northern Han kingdom and conquered its formidable capital, Chanyuan. Then, without rest, they had marched into a bay to lay siege to Youzhou. Even the most elite troops could not sustain such high-intensity warfare for so long. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that the main Khitan relief army was on its way. If he couldn't take Youzhou now, the consequences would be unthinkable. Time was his greatest enemy. But Zhao Guangyi would not retreat. As the younger brother who had always lived in the shadow of his legendary elder, Emperor Taizong of Song, Zhao Guangyin, he desperately needed this victory to prove himself. And the Central Plains, after 40 years of losing the 16 prefectures, desperately needed to reclaim Youzhou to secure its northern frontier. The unification of all under heaven would be achieved today. Zhao Guangyi made a decision, one that in itself was not entirely blameworthy, yet would profoundly alter the geopolitical landscape of China for the next 400 years. He gambled his final trump card, the Palace Corps, the Imperial Guard infantry, and the Imperial Guard cavalry, the elite of the elite, the Emperor's personal army from the capital. He sent 2 of his last great generals with a portion of this imperial army to join the assault, while he himself led the remainder north of Youzhou, preparing to intercept the Khitan reinforcements. The war drums thundered. A new ferocious assault began. Inside Youzhou, the Khitan defenders were also running on their last fumes. On the battlements, the Han Chinese general Han-Tang frantically issued defensive orders, his eyes constantly scanning the distant mountains on the horizon. He prayed for a relief force to burst from those hills, smash the Song army, and ride to the city's rescue. The relief force had, in fact, arrived. Zhao Guangyi's judgment had been flawless. The vanguard of the Khitan army swept onto the battlefield from the northwest. But this first wave, composed mainly of light cavalry and horse archers who had ridden day and night, was not strong enough to turn the tide. Zhao Guangyi's imperial guards, with their sturdy shields and powerful crossbows, easily repelled their probing attacks and pushed the front line further forward, all the way to the banks of the Gaoliang River, northwest of the city. By now, dusk was beginning to fall. The Song scouts peered across the river. In the shadows of the mountains, they couldn't discern the enemy's numbers, but they saw what appeared to be countless torches and banners. The intelligence was passed up the chain of command. Unsure of the enemy's true strength, the Song commanders made the most rational decision a good officer could make: halt the pursuit and establish a defensive position. But all rationality depends on one premise: that you still have cards left to play, that you have the reserves and the space to adapt. But Zhao Guangyi, having already bet all his elite troops, had no reserves, and by placing himself, the emperor and commander-in-chief, on the absolute front line, he had lost all room to maneuver. And so, a wise decision became a fatal mistake. Suddenly, a sky-shattering roar of war cries erupted. Suddenly, the thunder of hooves, like a landslide. Suddenly, countless torches lit up the horizon. And Zhao Guangyi and Han-Tang, 2 Han Chinese men on opposite sides of the war, both stared in disbelief at the same impossible direction: the south. Let's rewind 16 years, the 7th day of the first lunar month, 963 AD. While the citizens of the capital, Kaifeng, were still celebrating the Lunar New Year, 10,000 elite cavalry of the imperial army rode silently through the city's south gate. Their official mission was to answer a request from a local warlord to help suppress a rebellion. But this was merely a clever pretext devised by the founding emperor of the Song Dynasty, Zhao Guangyin. While the cavalry advanced, the central government swiftly mobilized the armies of 10 surrounding prefectures as a second wave. Within 2 months, the Song army had not only suppressed the rebellion, but had also eliminated their client. The kingdoms of Jingnan and Hunan fell with almost no resistance. This was the first highly efficient, low-cost step in the Song's wars of unification. It proved one thing. Before the might of the Song's professional, centralized imperial army, the southern warlord states were as fragile as paper. 2 years later, just before the new year, Zhao Guangyin struck again. This time, the target was the later Shu, a fabulously wealthy kingdom in the fertile Sichuan basin, prosperous in economy but derelict in its defenses. The Song launched a classic pincer attack with 60,000 elite troops. The invasion was a blitzkrieg. In just over 2 months, the Shu emperor surrendered. But military victory did not equal political control. The Song commanders allowed their troops to plunder the capital, and the emperor's crude attempts to extract the region's wealth to fund the central government quickly ignited a massive, province-wide rebellion. The same 60,000 men who had conquered a kingdom in 66 days were now bogged down in a brutal 2-year counterinsurgency campaign. But in the end, Sichuan was pacified, becoming a solid rear base for the Song. This was the second step. Next, in 970 AD, the Song army turned its sights on the southern Han in the deep south. This was a tough fight. The hot, humid climate and dense river networks were the natural enemies of the northern soldiers. After 5 hard-fought months relying on superior organization and logistics, the Song conquered the regions of modern-day Guangdong and Guangxi. This victory was crucial. The Song now directly controlled the lucrative maritime trade routes, providing a steady stream of cash for future wars. 4 years later, the ultimate test, the conquest of the Southern Tang. The Southern Tang was by far the most powerful of the southern kingdoms. The war lasted for 14 months. The siege of its capital, Jinling Nanjing, alone took nearly a year. But in the end, it fell. The last ruler of the Southern Tang, the great poet king Li Yu, tried to negotiate a ceasefire. He argued that his kingdom had already humbled itself and served the Song faithfully, so it did not deserve annihilation. But the Song emperor, Zhao Guangyin, gave a chilling reply. "You are right, the Southern Tang has done nothing wrong, but how can I allow another man to snore beside my own bed?" This was the core logic of the founding Song. Total unification, in the mold of the great Han and Tang dynasties. Everything else was just an excuse, a sacrifice on the path to that final goal.
By the time Li Yu, the great poet king whose name would echo through the ages, was escorted to Kaifeng to write his immortal lines of sorrow, "When will the flowers of spring and the autumn moon ever end? How much of the past is there to recall?" Zhao Guangyin's great project of unification was 90% complete. Of the old territories of the Han and Tang, the only significant lands yet to return to the fold of the Central Plains were the fragmented, less prosperous Hexi corridor and the 16 prefectures.
Ever since the year 938, when a puppet emperor had gifted the 16 prefectures to the Khitans, this territory had been a dagger pointed at the heart of the Central Plains. Every ruler had dreamed of taking it back. The Song had been preparing for years. Zhao Guangyin created a sealed treasury, a massive special fund. All the spoils from the southern conquests, along with a portion of the annual budget surplus, were locked away. His plan was rational. First, try to buy back the territory from the Khitans. If that failed, the fund would become a war chest to take it back by force. But standing in the way was a stubborn obstacle, the northern Han kingdom. Based in modern-day Shaanxi, the northern Han was a client state of the Khitans, a nail driven deep into the Song's northern flank. Zhao Guangyin knew that if he marched north, his army's side would be perpetually exposed to attack. In 968 and 969, he personally led two massive campaigns to conquer the northern Han capital of Taiyuan. Both failed. The city's defenses were formidable, and the Khitan relief armies always arrived just in time. These defeats forced the emperor to return to his south-first policy. But history did not give him another chance. In the 10th month of 976, on a snowy night, Zhao Guangyin died suddenly. His successor was not his son, but his younger brother, Zhao Guangyi, a man who, unlike his charismatic warrior brother, was a master administrator, a man who understood the machinery of bureaucracy. For him, the throne was not just an inheritance, it was a heavy burden. He had to finish his brother's work, and he had to do it better and faster to silence the whispers about the legitimacy of his succession. And so, he moved with astonishing efficiency. He used the Song's growing economic power to pressure the remaining southern states into submission without a fight. His prestige soared, and in the first month of 979, he launched the third and largest invasion of the northern Han. This time, he had a clear strategy. He sent a separate force to intercept the Khitan relief army, and at the Battle of Xialing Pass, they won a decisive victory. With no hope of rescue, the northern Han finally despaired. In the 5th month of 979, the city of Taiyuan, which had twice defied his brother, fell to him. In that moment, Zhao Guangyi stood at the pinnacle of his life. His soldiers, standing on the ruins of Taiyuan, cheered him as a god. The rational move was to halt, rest, and consolidate his gains. But in the emperor's mind, the situation looked different. The Khitans were in disarray. His own army's morale was at its peak. And perhaps most importantly, if he returned to the capital now, he would have to deal with the complex and expensive issue of rewarding his troops, a problem his fiscally minded personality was keen to avoid. To dodge this problem, and to seize what he saw as the ultimate prize, Zhao Guangyi made a gambler's decision. No rest, no return. The army would turn north and march directly on Youzhou. He thought it would be an easy fight. He believed the same army that had crushed the south could slice through the north like a hot knife through butter. This blind confidence, born from a string of easy victories, would be his undoing.
In all fairness, Emperor Taizong, Zhao Guangyi's personal abilities and administrative skills were far superior to those of many second emperors. His contributions to the Song Dynasty's ruling system were both foundational and transformative. And yet, for 1,000 years, he has been caricatured and ridiculed. At the end of the day, this all boils down to one reason. When measured against the gold standard of Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty, Li Shimin, Zhao Guangyi's military competence was simply abysmal.
On that night in 979 AD, the air by the Gaoliang River was thick and heavy. The Song army's decision to halt and form a defensive line was, tactically, almost perfect. Except for one thing. Zhao Guangyi had no cards left to play. As the Song troops were setting up their camp, the thunder of hooves erupted from the darkness. It did not come from the front. It came from the south, the direction from which they least expected an attack. The brilliant Khitan general, Yelu Xiuge, had led a second force of elite cavalry on a wide, sweeping maneuver and was now slamming into the Song army's exposed rear flank. For the exhausted Song soldiers, the terror of a night attack was amplified. As countless torches suddenly flared to life on the southern horizon, illuminating their tired faces, their psychological defenses began to crumble. And at that same moment, the city of Youzhou, which had been on the verge of death, exploded with a terrifying vitality. Inside, the Han Chinese general Han-Tang had seen his opportunity. He led a desperate charge out of the city gates, straight into the chaotic Song siege lines. The effect of this pincer attack, from within and without, was devastating. Han-Tang's force acted like a scalpel, severing the connection between the Song siege units and their command at the Gaoliang River. And Emperor Zhao Guangyi, who had been directing the battle from the front, was instantly transformed from a hunter into the hunted, trapped on a narrow riverbank. The battle spiraled out of control. Arrows flew through the darkness. Zhao Guangyi was hit twice in the thigh. In agony and terror, the supreme commander of the Song Empire made a decision that would not only seal the fate of the battle, but tarnish his name for 1,000 years. He fled. Too injured to ride a horse, Zhao Guangyi scrambled into a humble donkey cart. And so, in the chaos of the battlefield, the emperor of the great Song dynasty abandoned his army and vanished into the darkness of the North China Plain. It is said that he raced for over 50 miles in a single night, not stopping until he reached the safety of Youzhou to the southwest. For this legendary flight, later generations of Chinese netizens have bestowed upon him a mocking, posthumous title: the god of the Gaoliang River donkey cart. The emperor's disappearance was the final straw. Without a commander, the elite Song army broke. What followed was a massacre. 10,000 of the Song's finest professional soldiers were not killed on the front lines, but were trampled to death in the dark, chaotic stampede of their own retreat. By dawn, the banks of the river were littered with the abandoned banners and supplies of the Song army. The Khitan victory was not easy. Yeluqiuge was also severely wounded, and his own troops were too exhausted to mount a large-scale pursuit. But for Zhao Guangyi and the nascent Song dynasty, the defeat was a strategic catastrophe.
History is often a matter of chance. If Zhao Guangyi had held his ground that night, his reputation and Chinese history might have been completely rewritten. If he had died fighting, he might have been remembered as a hero. The official Song records are notoriously silent about the details of this defeat, leaving much to speculation. But one thing is certain: the Song army lost. The 16 prefectures remained in Khitan hands, and Zhao Guangyi's moment of glory was over before it had truly begun. Another thing is certain: the Han Chinese general, Han-Tang, had outshone every Khitan commander on the field that day, and his own glorious story was just beginning.
For the next 20 years, this Song emperor would exhibit a profoundly contradictory dual personality. Within the court and bureaucracy of Kaifeng, he was a political genius of the highest order, even possessing a certain forward-thinking vision. But on the borderlands, far from his capital, he remained a military incompetent, divorced from reality, and obsessed with micromanagement. Zhao Guangyi's greatest contribution to the Song dynasty was not the expansion of its territory, but the profound reconstruction of its capital, Kaifeng. In the logic of the preceding 5 dynasties and 10 kingdoms period, a capital was often just the temporary headquarters of the most powerful warlord. But during his 15 years as the prefect of Kaifeng, he gradually transformed it into one of the largest and most prosperous cities in the world, the undisputed center of Asia. His administrative experience, which perfectly complemented the Song's governing philosophy of centralizing power and weakening the periphery, completely reversed the trend of political fragmentation that had begun in the mid-Tang dynasty. He wasn't just expanding a city, he was using commerce, canal transport, and a complex civil bureaucracy to forcibly suck the power and wealth from the provinces into the central government. His most successful political maneuver was the complete confiscation of military power. Building upon the imperial army system left by his brother, he completely separated the authority to command troops from the authority to deploy them. While this design would later weaken the Song army's combat effectiveness, at the time, it miraculously ended the century-long vicious cycle of military coups that had plagued the Central Plains. Kaifeng evolved from a grim, defensive fortress into a modern civilizational hub, supported by scholar officials, professional merchants, and dense ledgers. And the most iconic symbol of this return from brutal slaughter to civilized order was, without a doubt, his official designation of his third son as crown prince in 995 AD, followed by a smooth transfer of power upon his death. For nearly a century, the concept of a crown prince had barely existed in the Central Plains. The succession of power was almost always accompanied by a bloody mutiny or the acclamation of a general. Zhao Guangyi's peaceful succession declared the completion of the imperial power loop. The state no longer belonged to the strongest, but to the one who followed the proper procedures of the ancestral system. This act finally pulled the Central Plains out of the barbaric state of "the strong shall rule" and into a predictable political stability. However, outside the world of official documents, within the commander's tent, Zhao Guangyi's mediocrity was just as stunning. In 980 AD, the year after the Gaoliang River disaster, he launched an expedition against Jiaozhi, modern-day northern Vietnam. His pretext was noble: to reclaim old Han and Tang territories during a period of local political turmoil. But in practice, he displayed the classic command style of a civilian minister, trusting maps while ignoring the climate. The result was catastrophic. The Song navy was crushed, and the army was ambushed during its retreat. Vietnam secured its de facto independence, and the campaign marked the upper limit of the Song's ability to expand southwards. Then he did something even more foolish. In 982, in an attempt to boost his flagging poll numbers, he tried to use administrative force to abolish the hereditary status of the Dingnan Army Command in the northwest, a region that had nominally submitted to the Song but remained effectively independent. This Xue Fan, cutting down the vassals, was met with a violent immune response in the fierce and complex frontier. Although the commander of the Dingnan army was forced into house arrest in Kaifeng, his younger brother led his followers into the desert, igniting a half-century-long rebellion of the Tangut people. In the subsequent military campaigns, Zhao Guangyi not only failed to solve the problem, but through a series of inefficient, reactive, and purely defensive strategies, he personally nurtured the rise of a future mortal enemy for the Song, the Western Xia.
The lights of Kaifeng grew ever brighter. Decades later, it would become the undisputed #1 metropolis in the world. Zhao Guangyi was undoubtedly a great builder of civilization, but his failures at the Gaoliang River, the Bahdang River, and in the northwest had already proven his abysmal military incompetence. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was he refused to accept his fate.
In the year 986 AD, outside the Zhuanda Gate of Kaifeng, the war machine of the Song Empire once again roared to life. This was the Yongxi Northern Expedition, and this time, a sense of near-certain victory filled the hearts of the Song court. This confidence was based on a set of cold, hard military metrics. First, although they had lost the Battle of Gaoliang River, it was a Pyrrhic victory for the Liao. They were too exhausted to pursue. Even according to the Liao's own likely exaggerated records, the Song had only lost about 10,000 men, a drop in the ocean for the Central Plains. Second, in the years that followed, the Liao had launched several retaliatory invasions. In 4 major border clashes, the Song's record was 2 wins, 1 draw, 1 loss. This included the legendary Battle of Yanmen Pass, where the Song general Yang Ye, with just 1,000 cavalry, outflanked and routed a Liao army of 100,000. This spectacular victory not only established the legendary generals of the Yang family as a cultural icon in China, but it also led to a collective epiphany among the Song leadership. Wait a minute, we're actually pretty good at this. Last time was just a fluke. Add to that the fact that retaking the 16 prefectures was the undisputed politically correct national policy. After 7 years of rebuilding and rearming, the Liao emperor died. His successor was only 12 years old, with his 30-year-old mother, Empress Dowager Xiao, acting as regent. When this news reached the Song court, the entire empire erupted in excitement. Wasn't this the classic textbook scenario from the preceding 5 dynasties era? A child ruler, a doubtful state, an orphan and a widow? Everyone knew exactly how this story was supposed to end. And so, from the court to the countryside, a chorus of petitions arose. Northern expedition! Northern expedition! But the Song court had forgotten one word: time. They failed to realize that this land had been out of their hands for nearly 50 years. 50 years is long enough for 2 generations to be born, and for an empire to complete a deep administrative and military consolidation. The Youzhou of this era was no longer the wavering border town of the past. It was a military hub with a multi-layered defense system, abundant supplies, and a populace with a strong sense of identity with the Khitan regime. And there was another, more important word the Song court could not have known: Sinicization. In those 50 years, the Liao dynasty had undergone a startlingly rapid transformation. From the very beginning, the founder of the Khitan Empire, Yelu Abaoji, had been a great admirer of the founder of the Han Dynasty, Liu Bang. He chose Liu as the Han-style surname for his own Yelu clan, and Xiao for the clan of his empress, after Liu Bang's great chancellor Xiao He. So the Liao emperor at this time should properly be called Liu Longshu. His Khitan name was Yelu Wenshenu, and as for the Liao's Empress Dowager, her name was Xiao Yanyan. This wasn't just a name game, it was a form of civilizational possession. The Khitans were declaring to all the Han Chinese under their rule, "The House of Liu has not vanished, it continues under the banner of the Great Liao." This metaphysical claim was backed by a practical, dual administration system. Talented Han Chinese like Han Derang governed the vast Han population as officials of the Southern Chancellery, while Khitan nobles managed their own tribal affairs through the Northern Chancellery. If the two could be harmonized, it would be the perfect fusion of nomadic cavalry power and sedentary agricultural productivity. And in a remarkable coincidence, it was said that before she married the emperor, the Empress Dowager Xiao had been betrothed to a Han Chinese man. His name, Han Derang.
While Zhao Guangyi was rallying his troops to reclaim the lands seized by barbarians, the Liao propaganda machine was already declaring that it was the true heir to the Han and Tang civilizations, that it was China. This huge cognitive gap plunged the Song army into a geopolitical blind spot. They thought they were liberating their brethren, only to find themselves crashing against a well-defended, logically self-consistent and homogeneous empire. Perhaps from the very beginning, the war was based on a fatal misunderstanding.
In the strategic gambit known as the Yongxi Northern Expedition, Zhao Guangyi divided his 200,000 elite troops into 3 armies. The core of the plan was for the Eastern Army, led by the famous General Cao Bin, to strike directly at Youzhou and pin down the main Liao force, while the Central and Western armies took advantage of the vacuum to recapture the surrounding prefectures. At first, the Song offensive was overwhelming. All 3 armies made significant gains. The Eastern Army, in particular, swept through to the outskirts of Youzhou. Their advance was so successful that even the military amateur Zhao Guangyi sensed a problem, repeatedly sending messages from the rear, micromanaging, "You're moving too fast. Halt." At the same time, Empress Dowager Xiao sent her own message to the defenders of Youzhou. "I am coming. Hold the line." The 30-year-old Empress Dowager Xiao, with the young Emperor Liu Longshu at her side, and her lover, Han Derang, in her council, unleashed the Pishijun, the elite private army of the Khitan nobility, and marched for the Youzhou front. Upon arrival, she displayed a military genius that transcended her gender and age. She calmly observed the Song army's attacks on the fortified city, while constantly sending out her iron cavalry to harass their supply lines. As the Song army was forced to shuttle back and forth, even the veteran General Cao Bing began to lose his nerve. Faced with the Liao's all-or-nothing counterattack, he chose to retreat. And on that retreat, Empress Dowager Xiao, who had been waiting for this moment, unleashed her general offensive. The Liao cavalry crashed into the retreating Song army like a tidal wave. The defeat was total. After crushing the main force, she immediately redirected her armies to attack the other 2 Song columns. Unsurprisingly, they too were routed, giving up all the territory they had gained. The legendary General Yang Ye was killed in action. The Yongxi Northern Expedition had ended in a complete and utter disaster for the Song. The next 3 years were the darkest of times for the people on the Song border. The Liao cavalry launched a furious campaign of revenge, no longer just trying to capture cities, but using large-scale raids to destroy the administrative foundation of the Song in the north. Faced with the high mobility of the Liao cavalry, the military incompetent but architectural genius Zhao Guangyi came up with an extraordinary defensive solution: turn the Hebei plain into a fortress and a swamp. Since his army could not defeat the Khitan cavalry on open ground, the Song mobilized a massive labor force to dig a dense network of deep trenches and divert rivers, literally creating a 1,000-li-long Great Wall of water. While it successfully limited large-scale cavalry charges, it also locked the Song Dynasty into a permanent, passive defensive posture. Seeing the stalemate, the ambitious Empress Dowager Xiao temporarily eased the pressure on the Song and turned her attention eastward to the conquest of Goryeo, Korea. Although she failed to completely annex the kingdom, she successfully forced it into the Liao's tribute system, cutting off a potential eastern ally for the Song. At the same time, the Tangut rebels in the northwest seized the opportunity created by the Song-Liao standoff. While the Song were preoccupied, they grew stronger in the desert. And Empress Dowager Xiao, keenly aware of this enemy of her enemy, arranged a marriage between a Liao princess and the Tangut leader, creating a two-front strategic chokehold on the Song. Does this tactic sound familiar? Yes, it was a near-perfect replica of the marriage alliance policy the Han Dynasty had once used against the Xiongnu. Zhao Guangyi was now showing signs of severe strategic fatigue. He had neither the strength to crush the Tangut rebellion nor the resources to open a new major front while maintaining the Hebei defense line. The rise of the Western Xia had become irreversible. In 997 AD, the second ruler of the Song Empire, Zhao Guangyi, died in his palace in Kaifeng. The cause of death: complications from the old arrow wounds he had received at the Gaoliang River.
He left behind a contradictory legacy. Domestically, he had built an unprecedented era of civilian prosperity. Kaifeng was the envy of the world. But in foreign policy, he left a defensive empire trapped behind its great wall of water, its expansionist spirit broken. The dream of restoring the great Han-Tang frontiers was shattered. When Zhao Guangyi closed his eyes, that mirror China to the north, the Liao was still powerful and stern. The dream of unification had failed. In its place was a century-long anxious era of brotherly states.
Zhao Guangyi's third son ascended the throne as Emperor Zhenzong. To the north, Empress Dowager Xiao was at the absolute zenith of her political life. And this military genius now had a new plan to break the stalemate. Starting in 999, the Liao launched almost annual raids. The two sides traded blows across the swamps and fortresses of the Hebei plain, but the geopolitical deadlock remained. By 1004, Empress Dowager Xiao realized that without a decisive victory on the battlefield, the Liao's claim to be the mirror China would remain just words. That autumn, she and her son, Emperor Liu Longshu, assembled an army of 200,000 elite troops. Bypassing the heavily fortified Song defense line, they adopted a radical, deep strike strategy aimed straight at the heart of the empire. The Liao army sliced through the Song defenses like a sharp knife, driving all the way to the northern bank of the Yellow River, to the vital city of Chanyuan. They were now just one river away from the Song capital of Kaifeng. This was the most severe existential crisis the Central Plains had faced since the Battle of Gaoliang River. The capital was in chaos. Some officials advocated fleeing south, a move that would have effectively surrendered the legitimacy of the Central Plains. At the critical moment, the Chancellor, Ko Jun, used near coercion to force the mild-mannered Emperor Zhenzong to lead the army to the front himself. But when the Emperor's personal yellow banner appeared on the walls of Chanyuan, the demoralized Song army erupted in a thunderous roar. Their morale restored, they fought with ferocious power. Pinned against the river, the two sides fought to a bloody stalemate. And a stalemate was a disaster for the Liao. They were deep in enemy territory, their flanks exposed and their supply lines vulnerable. Then, an accident happened. The Liao's vanguard commander, Xiao Talin, was scouting the Song positions when he strayed into the range of the Song's triple-bow arquebulistas. These heavy siege weapons, tuned by Song engineers, had astonishing range and power. A bolt the size of a small log was fired. It pierced Xiao Talin, killing him instantly. The death of their top general sent a shockwave through the Liao army. Empress Dowager Xiao realized that her planned Blitzkrieg had turned into a quagmire. If she stayed, her isolated army could suffer the same fate as Zhao Guangyi's at Gaoliang River. At that moment, the two sides finally reached a reconciliation. In the snows of early 1005, they signed the Treaty of Chanyuan. Status: the Song and Liao were now officially brotherly states. Emperor Zhenzong of the Song would address Empress Dowager Xiao as his aunt, and Liu Longshu, the Liao emperor, would address Emperor Zhenzong as his elder brother. Tribute: the Song would pay the Liao an annual tribute of 100,000 taels of silver and 200,000 bolts of silk. Territory: The border was fixed along the current line of control. The 16 prefectures were now, legally, Liao territory. The treaty was signed. The two sides bid farewell. And from that day forward, to the great surprise of later generations, these nominal brotherly states actually maintained a genuine peace for 117 years. Not until the rise of the Yuezhans in the year 1122, with the Liao dynasty on the very brink of annihilation, did the Song finally tear up the treaty. 200,000 elite troops marched on the Liao. Their objective was singular: Youzhou.
Putting aside nationalist sentiment, the treaty was a fantastic deal for the Song. The annual tribute was less than 1% of the cost of a single major war. In exchange, they got over a century of peace and an unprecedented golden age of culture and commerce. But from a higher geopolitical perspective, Empress Dowager Xiao had won something far more valuable: legitimacy. After the treaty, the Liao were no longer barbarians, but a recognized brother empire. The peace allowed them to deepen their Sinicization and draw upon the economic resources of the Central Plains. With her tenacity and leadership, Empress Dowager Xiao had secured a century of stability for her empire and cemented the concept of Khitan is also China in the northern lands. This cold peace, maintained by money and protocol, shifted the game from the battlefield to the undercurrents of culture and identity. The dream of a single unified empire had faded. In its place, a new multipolar East Asian order had been born from this treaty.
Let me share one final detail with you. Ever since Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, had the legendary Hishibi jade carved into his imperial treasure, this seal, inscribed with the words, "Having received the mandate from heaven, may my reign be long and prosperous," was passed down through the ages as the Heirloom Seal of the realm. When the Qin dynasty surrendered, Liu Bang obtained the seal and founded the Han Dynasty. After the Han, the seal was held in turn by the states of Wei, Jin, and even the northern dynasties during the period of division. When the Sui and Tang reunified the realm, the Tang emperors also possessed this very seal, until the year 937. When Xu Jingtang and the Khitan army sacked the capital of the later Tang, a dynasty that claimed to be the heir to the Tang's legacy, the seal vanished in the Great Fire of Luoyang. Later, Xu Chongui of the later Jin claimed to have recovered the seal, or perhaps had forged a new one, and used it to declare his own legitimacy. But when the Khitans subsequently destroyed the later Jin, this very seal fell into the hands of the nascent Liao state. And so, when Zhao Kuangyin founded the Song Dynasty, he faced an unprecedented embarrassment. He became the first major emperor in Chinese history to rule without the heirloom seal of the realm. And this was one of the sources of the Liao's unwavering confidence in their claim to be the true China. As the saying on the seal proclaimed, having received the mandate from heaven, with the seal in their hand, they believed they held the world.